back to another video. This one picks up where my last video left off, and that last video was going through the contents of my first aid kit, where I was trying to get people to sort of expand their definition or what they consider first aid items. And in that video, I did not discuss these items here, and I'm going to address them now in this video. But before I do, I want to start over here with my Garmin InReach Mini. So in the last video, I discussed how it's great to have a two-way communicator, but what I didn't talk about specifically is how this would factor into camping with a dog. In my experience, I was doing some backcountry canoe camping in Algonquin Park in Ontario, and speaking to the staff members there, I was told that they would not respond into the backcountry for a rescue if it involved an injured dog, only for humans. Now, I don't know if that was just a matter of opinion of the staff that I was speaking to, or if that is actually a general rule. So I'll sort of add this caveat that that may differ from region to region. However, I still want to believe that if your dog is injured and you genuinely need assistance getting out, or you think that getting out is going to take a lot longer if you're carrying them, especially because that's going to significantly impair your traveling speed. I want to believe that people are good-natured and want the best for everybody. So I think if you were able to communicate or send a message out to communicate with the rescue staff, that there is a chance that you may be stuck out overnight and aren't prepared to do that, that they can maybe work and coordinate with you about that. So I still think there's value with a two-way communicator when camping, backpacking, and hiking with a dog. But as mentioned, I'm going to start over here with the first aid items. And this one here specifically is a medication called gabapentin. Gabapentin is a medication that's used in the human world as well. This is an analgesic. It is for pain management. It does not really have any other properties. It is important to note, though, that this is a fairly potent pain management for dogs, and its secondary effect profile can include lethargy, so being very tired, loss of coordination, so stumbling, and a generalized decreased level of consciousness. So they may be more prone to wanting to go to sleep. And so if you were to give them this medication, this would be in more severe pain circumstances where you were going to be carrying them out. So that is gabapentin. This next medication over here is meloxicam. Meloxicam is like a Advil, which is ibuprofen that we would use in the human world. It is an NSAID, meaning that it has both anti-inflammatory as well as pain management properties. The anti-inflammatory is really good if your dog sustains a sprain or strain, and its pain profile or pain management profile will help with that. It is important to note with this particular medication that you would not want to give it if the dog is severely dehydrated, because meloxicam being metabolized by the kidneys, this can result in renal failure or kidney failure if the dog is severely dehydrated. So this is like a use with caution in certain circumstances. This is a fluid, and you would administer that using a syringe. It doesn't have to be sterile. This is just an oral medication, so you would draw up the appropriate amount for the size, weight, age, etc. of your dog and administer it by mouth. And lastly, we have antibiotics. So this is a broad spectrum antibiotic. It is administered once every 12 hours. So I just have 2 in here because this is set up for day hiking. So this would cover me for a 48-hour period. And it is useful if there is an injury with the possibility of becoming infected, or say if your dog is like immunocompromised, or you're capable of recognizing the signs and symptoms of a centralized infection. This is good for that. Its reason for being in here is primarily for opportunistic infections associated with opened exposed wounds or injuries. So that is antibiotics. Again, as mentioned in the previous video, this is a product, it's a self-adherent bandage, or dressing rather. Some people call it Coban, other people call it Cling. I have also heard it in the equine and animal worlds referred to as vet wrap. And it comes in a whole spectrum of colors, but what makes it great is that it is a highly water resistant or hydrophobic product. So if your dog does sustain an injury, you would treat that like a laceration or a abrasion or something like that. You would treat it with the standard first aid materials that you already have, and then you can dress that with this vet wrap. Similarly, as discussed in my first aid video, you can use this to treat sprains and strains, which your dog may sustain. One possible scenario for a laceration for a dog would be a cut on the paws or the pads. We actually had a situation where a sharp piece of ice took off an entire layer of that pad. It was raw and exposed, and it was bleeding mildly. And so you could treat it and then dress it with this particular bandage. What would be even better in that situation, though, is if you had little boots like this. So even if you don't plan on using these little booties all the time, I think they're still really nice to have, not only if you get into an area as a preventative measure, say if it had sharp rocks or shale, but also if they do sustain an injury, where something like this, after a prolonged period of walking, would be likely to fall off. Even if you did secure it with tape, you'd be, keeping a close eye on it. You could instead, put their feet into a boot and protect it that way. I'll take this opportunity to also mention too as well that dogs typically have larger front paws than rear. That's why these rough wear boots are sold in pairs, just like this, so that you can find the appropriate size. So they're kind of front wheel drive in that sense. What else do I want to mention? Hiking. So taking a bit of a step back, one thing that I always advocate for, instead of wearing a collar around the neck, because if the dog was to fall, say down a hill or off a cliff or something like that, you wouldn't want them, that force going into their neck. It could damage the trachea or it could create a spinal problem. So I always recommend hiking in a harness like this. This is the Roughwear Front Range, I believe, and it has a centralized point of attachment here at the back. So the fall would be absorbed throughout the thoracic skeleton. This is not only our day hiking backpack, but it is also what we would use for multi-days as well. And I'm just gonna go through it item by item. In both pockets, we have clothing at the moment. Clothing, as we all know, is not typically very heavy, but it is bulky. And so if we can reduce the volume from like our day packs and we can put that onto the dog, then that is, all the better. We can use smaller packs for us. Typically, I would carry the water and the food because it's, much heavier. A point of reference is that you would never want to exceed, I believe it's 25% of the dog's weight carrying. So if it's a 40-pound dog, that would be, approximately 10 pounds. So you don't want it too heavy. I think this is 4 pounds. So it's maybe 5, well within that threshold. So let's just go through it pocket by pocket, see what we have. So on this side is a Coghlan's odor-proof bag labeled dog poop. If you're in the backcountry and you're trying to practice leave no trace principles, or if you're in a popular hiking trail, picking up the dog poop is, preferred, and having a odor-proof bag to put it in from personal experience, highly recommended. These are, like I said, the Coghlan's ones. They're, a fairly inexpensive brand. I just got them off Amazon. I think they're like $7 for a package of maybe 6. So very reasonable, I think, for not having to smell it on a hot summer's day. I've been there, you don't want to be. Inside, we have a Roughwear Canine overcoat. So this is a nylon coat that has a fleece backer on it. This is really good for dogs that have hair instead of fur. We would use this in the wintertime if we were snowshoeing through a forest where the wet snow could fall on the dog that would soak into that hair very rapidly. But you know, it's more or less open at the sides, so there's good venting and breathability that you know, the dog's not really going to overheat. So I like that. And then just inside here we have some pickup bags. Let's start with this one. So again, this is the smaller version of the Koeghlins odorproof bags. These are dog treats, or 4 dog treats rather. What I really like are the Nulo kind of like jerky pieces, because I found some treats, you know, if they're pressed and bouncing around for a while, they just turn into like a powder in the bottom, where the Nulo ones are fairly moist and stick together, and it's easy to, you know, to administer. So I like the Nulo products for that. And tucked in behind here, we have a nice canine water bowl. Again, this is another Ruffwear product. As mentioned, I always carry the water because it's heavy and bulky. You know, dogs are, you know, more than happy to drink from a nice flowing stream. You could also use this for feeding kibble. A note on that though, if you are going to feed it with kibble, make sure you clean it out thoroughly on the inside, because you don't want that powdered residue you know, attracting animals. And then at night, take this and store it in with your, you know, in your odor-proof, bear-resistant container. So, point of consideration. But for day hiking, you know, nice little lightweight collapsible bowl works really well. Here we have a raincoat. This is a Ruffwear sun shower with a poor job of waterproofing I have on here. Again, if your dog has hair, so if they're like a, you know, a doodle variety, having something like this is going to really help keep them warm by keeping them dry. But just the same, if it's a heavy rain, there's no reason why you couldn't use this on a dog with fur, because the water will still permeate through those coats. So especially when you're climbing into a tent at the end of the day, you know, the dog won't come in and just shake water everywhere all over the items that you've spent all day trying to keep dry. So something like this, I think is very useful from a comfort and the way that, you know, convenience kind of thing. And then lastly, we have a really puffy jacket. Get another Ruffwear product. This is a insulated item with, you know, side stretch insulated panels. So this would be our warm, our winter weight kind of jacket here. So we would sort of pick and choose depending on our activity and our season. Now, as mentioned, you're going to get to camp. You're going to, you know, crawl into your tent, and the dog is ideally going to want somewhere to sleep. Dogs are, I don't want to say people too, but, you know, we're all animals. Like, you know, they have muscles and bones, and you know, having something soft and insulating to sleep on is really valuable, especially if the dog is of senior age and you've just, you know, done a highly physical activity by hiking. Having somewhere where they can lay down and feel comfortable, and as mentioned, warm as well. So if you're doing any sort of mountain or extended season camping, insulating from the ground is also really beneficial. There are some dogs that are, you know, certainly more comfortable. Huskies come to mind with, you know, multiple coats, that sort of thing. But I'm sure any senior husky would, you know, appreciate a soft, warm, comfortable place to sleep. There's a self-inflating mat. And it collapses down. A note on this though, this is a 25-inch wide mat, and dogs tend to sleep in, you know, donut shapes as opposed to us where we sleep very linear. And so having a wider mat is going to be of value. If you're trying to, you know, get a large dog on a narrow 20-inch wide mat, you may find that their paws are going to step off the side of it. So this not only serves for comfort, but it also protects the floor of your tent as well. A note on tents though, I had a tent, I won't say which one. I was so unimpressed because it was advertised as being 50 inches wide. And this being a 25-inch or a wide mat, I sleep on a 25-inch or a wide mat. 50 inches. And as it turns out that it was only 50 inches in the corner, and it had a significant taper in the middle, so much so that about 10 inches of our mats were overlapping. So I got rid of that tent. I now have a tarp tent, double rainbow lithium, which is a true 50-inch wide tent, and it perfectly accommodates this 25-inch wide mat next to my 25-inch wide sleeping mat. So if you are thinking about doing a single person and a dog inside the tent, take a moment to check the narrowest dimension of that tent, but what is effectively between those doors, because just because it's advertised as a certain width doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the case. My strategy is I typically put the dog down toward the feet end, so that if they're moving around and end up sort of leaning on my sleeping mat, they're not sort of pushing me in the shoulder off my own. They have a bit more room. And then at the head end of my tent is where I would put my clothing bags or my personal items, that sort of thing. And that strategy is intended to sort of take up that floor space, because once more, dogs' nails can and are sharp, and could theoretically poke through the bottom of your tent, causing a need for repair. And so their own sleeping mat does protect your tent in that regard too as well. So one other item that's important to the dog's sleep system is the ability to keep them warm. Now, again, some breeds like Huskies, Malamutes, that sort of thing, with thick coats that are either acclimatized, or the type of breed that would otherwise not get cold or be cold in cold environments. Amazing. But with the rise of popularity with doodle varieties, where they're going to have a hair that can absorb water, you want to be mindful that nighttime temperatures get quite low, and they're susceptible of getting cold just like we do. And so I had this made. This is an 850 powered down quilt, and it was sized for my dog so that he had something warm to go over him. This was kind of like a first generation product. I have some ideas on how I'm going to sort of modify or tweak this moving forward. But yeah, some blanket system, etc. You don't have to go as fancy as I did here. The only reason why I did is 850 powered down. It can be compressed into a very small, amount of volume. I think I fit this in a 4-liter bag once fully compressed, so really quite small. So the ability to keep them warm is, while they sleep, is important. Similarly, if they do get wet, have the ability to dry them off while, before or just as they're climbing into the tent is also great. As mentioned, you don't want them shaking, getting water everywhere. And so the best way to do that is with a towel. Now, if you have a dog that is prone to developing a lot of that wet dog smell, you can appreciate that maybe having separate towels for you and your dog would be of benefit. I originally was just using one, and I can assure you from firsthand experience that wet dog smell, when once I prioritized them and got them dry and went to dry myself, will absolutely end up all over you. So we went separate, and then he has his own. So this is a pack towel. This is one of their originals. It's very similar to the Ultralight. I happen to have one in a contrasting color, so I can keep them separate. I also keep them in the little storage sack, inside a sack. I know bags in bags redundancy is not always the best thing for lightweight, but again, that transfer of odor, can certainly happen. Yeah, a nice lightweight, quick drying towel, like a pack towel. There's a number of different manufacturers. I believe these guys were the originator of it. So, as I mentioned, I really like to support the originators of products. Plus, I have got lots of experience with them, and they're great. Like a lightweight towel that could be hung to dry the day following, or whenever it's next not raining. And even if it's not raining, even if they just went for a swim at the end of the day, I know my guy has jumped into a lake, far later in the day than I would have liked him, knowing that the sun had gone down and he couldn't naturally just dry himself off You know, dogs are, you know, children sometimes. So again, having the ability to dry them off before the end of the day. And I just keep them in a little waterproof bag. This is a 2-liter Sea to Summit. And this is where I would keep, you know, my ultralight pack towels and my bathing suit as well. So yeah, keeping warm at night and drying them off, really quite important, I think. Now let's talk about water. So when I go canoeing or kayaking or paddleboarding or any number of different activities, I always wear a life jacket. But that doesn't mean that water can't be incredibly cold or glacier cold. That doesn't mean that I can't get hit on the head. That doesn't mean I can't fatigue. And that also doesn't mean that I want to spend 100% of my energy trying to just swim as opposed to maybe collecting items that could be actively floating down a river. So I wear a life jacket. I think when you're on the water, that's a good opportunity to just shelve any ego that I might have. And this is what I wear. And similarly, I highly recommend a life jacket for your dog for all of those same reasons. Dogs can fatigue, cold water can shock them, they can inhale water, and now they're struggling, or they're prioritizing, sorry, trying to breathe as opposed to trying to swim. I've personally been canoeing with my guy, and we have had whitecap waves breaking into the boat. And I knew if I ever tipped or flooded or swamped or any number of those things, that worrying about him and his ability to swim and stay above water was not going to be, you know, on the priority of my mind. Does that mean he wasn't a good swimmer? Absolutely not. He was an incredible swimmer. He was, you know, swimming actively in the oceans with, you know, with big waves, and I had full confidence in him. But when you're in the remote areas of the backcountry, then that's when my threshold for risk, my risk tolerance, really does lower. So, as you'll see here, there's a bit of a theme. When it comes to life jackets, I really like to wear red. Again, I always associate red with safety. There have been some studies that have suggested, I think Mustang Survival in Vancouver, Canada did a study that I think pointed towards the high visibility yellow as being the most identifiable when floating in the water. That's not always readily available, and so from a continuity perspective, I like to go with this. In fact, I actually sought this one out. This was a previous year Roughwear float coat, I believe, and I liked it because their newer version had red on the bottom, but it was a much darker color up top. I think it was a gray. They've since redesigned this. There's a newer version out there now, but I really wanted something where when they were sitting in the water and you're only going to see that top part of the dog exposed, that that I could, you know, identify him more rapidly. So I think a life jacket is a great idea, even if the dog is a great swimmer, because there are so many variables that can go into it. So just that little bit of safety, peace of mind, I think goes a long way. And last but not least, when camping and hiking with your dog, is having a good leash. Now, as mentioned, I recommend hiking with a harness like this that has a centralized attachment point instead of a collar, so that if they were to, you know, slip down a slope or worse, fall off a cliff or a mountain, then you have a more robust way of supporting the dog as opposed to them getting caught around their neck. This is what I used for 14 years. This is your standard nylon 1-inch leash in a 4-foot length. It has, you know, the little kind of like pulled style tether, and these are perfectly acceptable. The downside though to nylon is that it is not the most abrasion resistant material out there. And if you're anything like me, you probably have spent more than one occasion hand washing this in the kitchen sink after a rainy day, because nylon loves to absorb water, and with that water will also come the mud and the dirt. And I just hate having, you know, crispy, hard leashes that are not very good. And they also, though nylon does have a bit of an elastic quality to it, especially when wet, they're not designed with any sort of shock absorption in mind. And so if you're hiking with your dog in a exposed area and that dog was to take a fall, then what can happen is you can transmit a lot of those forces into a buckle that's not fall rated. Roughwear does make one harness that is designed for rock climbing, and they also make another one called the Load Up, which is for use in a vehicle. And those would presumably have a certain amount of testing with regard to the actual harness's ability to not blow stitches and rip out. But if you can, the best way to do that is to use a leash that has a built-in elastic property. Now, there are a number of different ones on the market. Some look like they might, others do, but maybe are so soft that they're actually not really contributing too much, because when they bottom out, they're still going to transmit 100% of the forces to that buckle. So this is a big teaser. One of the projects that I've been working on for longer than I care to admit is finally coming together. I've been working with some really excellent people, and I have a really exciting announcement that's going to come in a future video dedicated all to itself. Thank you very much for watching. I sincerely appreciate it. If you have any suggestions on items that you think should be included in this discussion that I have not mentioned here today, please let me know. I would love to learn more, and I don't profess to be an expert at all things. Big reason for this channel is to share the things that I know and that I believe in, to help inspire other people in their own situations, and take advantage of the outdoors. There's so many different activities and opportunities out there. So thank you very, very much, and we'll see you in another one. You take care.